Chapter 1. A cancelled flight and an uncomfortable quiet. Greg Connors packed like a man who had done it so often he could have completed the task blindfolded. 2 shirts folded with mathematical precision, 1 pair of jeans rolled tightly, toiletries already pre-organized in a clear zip pouch. The suitcase itself practically packed him at this point. It waited open on the bed, expectant and routine, like the rest of his life. Behind him, Cynthia lay stretched across the couch, half wrapped in a blanket that had no business being necessary given the thermostat setting. The television hummed softly in the background, ignored more than watched. "So what's the grand plan this weekend?" Greg asked, zipping the inner compartment without looking up. Cynthia shrugged without much enthusiasm. "Sleep. Maybe more sleep after that. I might watch something completely mindless and pretend I'm not an adult." Greg smiled faintly. "That sounds ambitious." "It is. There's a lot of technique involved in doing nothing properly." "Well, as long as you pace yourself," he said, lifting the suitcase onto the floor. "Burnout is real." She gave him a look over the back of the couch. "You joke, but I take my hobbies seriously. I've noticed." He checked his watch and grabbed his jacket. "I've got to swing by the office first. We're heading to the airport straight from there." Cynthia sat up slightly. "Another glamorous weekend of machinery inspection." "You'd be surprised how little glamour there is in conveyor belts," he replied. "Though I've had a few close calls with rogue packaging equipment. Dangerous work. High stakes." Greg agreed, deadpan. They met at the door in an easy, practiced rhythm. A quick kiss, a brief hug, a familiarity that felt settled rather than stale. "I'll be back Monday evening," he said. "I'll try not to redecorate the place while you're gone." "Appreciated." With that, he stepped out, his mind already shifting gears before the elevator doors even closed. The conference room smelled faintly of dry erase markers and stale coffee. Greg sat with the inspection team, reviewing schematics and reports, his attention sharp and focused. If there was one place he excelled without question, it was here, analyzing, diagnosing, fixing. Machines made sense. They followed rules. When something was wrong, there was always a reason. People, on the other hand, were less cooperative. They had been at it for hours when Greg's boss answered a call at the head of the table. The shift in expression was subtle but immediate, attention tightening, posture adjusting. "All right," the boss said, hanging up a minute later. "Change of plans. The assembly line's down. Major issue. They're offline for a few days." A collective sigh filled the room. Not frustration, just the quiet recalibration of professionals accustomed to variables. "Trips canceled?" someone asked. "Trips canceled," he confirmed. "We regroup here. Prep for the next one." Greg nodded along with everyone else. It was routine. Annoying but routine. Within minutes, his brain had already pivoted to the next checklist. He didn't think to text Cynthia. The weekend trip ceased to exist, and with it, the need to update her seemed oddly distant. He'd tell her later. The condo greeted him with silence. It wasn't unusual, not technically. Cynthia sometimes worked late or lost track of time with friends. Greg set his suitcase down and walked through the living room, glancing around without really seeing anything out of place. The couch was empty, the blanket still draped lazily over one arm. "Probably out," he muttered, more to fill the quiet than out of concern. He unpacked methodically, placing each item back where it belonged. Then, on impulse, he opened the refrigerator and considered the contents. She'll be hungry, he decided. Cooking wasn't his passion, but it was a manageable system, inputs, outputs, predictable results. He assembled something simple but solid, moving through the process with quiet efficiency. The clock drifted forward. 7:30, then 8. By 8:15, Greg had already eaten, cleaned up, and stored Cynthia's portion neatly in the refrigerator. "She'll appreciate it," he said to no one. By 8:45, he was on the couch, remote in hand, halfway engaged in a show he couldn't recall the name of. For once, the silence felt pleasant. There was no background conversation, no negotiation over what to watch, no sudden complaint about cold feet finding their way under his leg at inconvenient hours. He didn't dislike those things. Not really. But the absence of them, that had its own appeal. Greg leaned back, letting his thoughts slow to a rare, comfortable crawl. 9 o'clock. That was when the thought clicked. Not loud, not urgent, just present. "Okay, that's late." He reached for his phone and typed quickly. "What are you up to?" The reply came almost immediately. Asterisk not much. "Just watching TV before bed." Smiley face asterisk. Greg blinked. Then, slowly, he turned his head and looked at the empty space beside him on the couch. Then to the kitchen. Then back at the couch again, as if she might materialize just to prove him wrong. She did not. "Ha!" He wasn't angry. Not yet. Mostly confused. He typed again. "I think I left one of my folders on the office desk. Can you check if it's there?" The response came with a smiling emoji. "I'm sorry. I'm actually at my parents' house. Decided to spend the weekend with them while you're gone." Greg stared at the message for a moment, then exhaled slowly. "Well, that makes more sense." He leaned back again, the tension easing as quickly as it had formed. "You're overthinking things," he told himself. "It happens. His reply was simple. Hope you have a great weekend. Get some extra sleep for both of us. Her response was equally light. Definitely will, smiley face. Miss you already. Greg smiled faintly and set the phone down. He could have told her he was home. Maybe he should have. But the bed was waiting. And for the first time in 5 months, it would be entirely his. No blanket theft. No sudden temperature complaints in the middle of the night. No mysterious elbow positioning that defied anatomy. Just peace. Luxury, he murmured as he climbed into bed. The quiet wrapped around him comfortably, and within minutes, Greg was asleep, a small, content smile still lingering. The next morning unfolded slowly, deliberately. Greg took his time getting ready, savoring the absence of urgency. Coffee stretched longer, breakfast was unrushed, and when he finally grabbed his keys, it was with an easy, unhurried energy. The drive to Cynthia's parents' house was familiar, the neighborhood welcoming in its quiet predictability. He pulled up just after 9 a.m., glancing briefly at the driveway. No car, he noted. Probably out getting coffee. He knocked, hands in his pockets. The door swung open, and Cynthia's mother greeted him with a bright smile that flickered, just for a second, into something else. Greg, she said, pulling him into a hug. Good morning, he replied, stepping inside. She glanced past him toward the street, her expression tightening slightly. Greg followed her gaze, then looked back at her. Everything okay? Oh, yes, she said quickly, stepping aside. I was just wondering if Cynthia was with you. Greg paused. That sentence didn't sit right. No, he said carefully. Did she not mention where she was going this morning? Her confusion was immediate and genuine. I haven't talked to her in a few days. I thought she was with you. Greg felt something shift, not sharply, but enough to register. Cynthia's dad appeared in the hallway. What's going on? Greg didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled out his phone and typed, Good morning. What are you up to? 3 small dots appeared almost instantly. Just having coffee with my parents. Greg turned the screen around. The room went very, very quiet. Oh, her mother said softly. Oh, her father echoed, though his tone carried far less softness. Greg nodded once, his own expression settling into something composed, almost clinical. Okay, he said, and just like that, the comfortable logic of his world stopped making sense. Chapter 2. The brunch that isn't. Cynthia's father folded his arms, the gesture slow and deliberate, like a man settling into a position he had no intention of leaving anytime soon. The kitchen, warm and ordinarily inviting, now felt like a place where conversations carried weight they hadn't been designed to hold. Greg stood just inside the room, his phone still in his hand, the glowing screen hovering between explanation and accusation. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't needed to. The evidence was quiet, simple, and undeniable. She says she's here, her mother said, though not as a question. It sounded more like she was trying to translate a language she no longer understood. Greg nodded once. Yeah. And she isn't, her father added, the words landing heavier. No, Greg said. There wasn't much else to say about that part. For a long moment, nobody moved. The only sound came from the faint ticking of the wall clock, marking time that suddenly felt slower, more deliberate. Finally, Cynthia's mother exhaled softly and reached for the back of a chair as though she needed something steady. Greg, she began, then stopped, searching for the right angle into a conversation that hadn't existed 5 minutes ago. Has anything like this happened before? It wasn't accusatory. If anything, it was cautious, careful. Greg considered that. No, he said truthfully. Then, after a brief pause, he added, At least, not that I knew about. Her father let out a short breath that might have been a sigh or might have been irritation. That's not exactly comforting. No, Greg agreed. He slipped his phone into his pocket, the movement controlled, almost precise. His expression hadn't shifted much, but there was a tightness around his eyes now, a quiet recalculation taking place. I don't want to jump to conclusions, he continued, but right now I've got 2 different answers to one simple question. That's not great. That's one way to put it, her father muttered. Her mother shot him a look, but it softened quickly when she turned back to Greg. This isn't like her, she said, more firmly now, as though deciding on that truth even if it needed convincing. Cynthia isn't deceptive. Greg tilted his head slightly, considering the word. I don't think she's deceptive either, he said. But she is currently being deceptive. The distinction hung in the air. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't even harsh. But it was exact. Her father gave a small, reluctant nod. Fair enough. Greg shifted his weight, glancing once around the familiar kitchen. He had been here dozens of times, holidays, casual dinners, long conversations that stretched late into the evening. It had always felt easy. Now it felt like a place waiting for answers. I'm not here to cause problems between you and her, Greg said after a moment. That's not what this is. Her mother stepped closer. You didn't cause anything. No, he replied calmly. But I'm definitely part of what's happening now. Her father leaned against the counter, studying Greg more closely. What do you want to do? That was the question. Greg didn't answer immediately. He let the silence work for him, organizing thoughts the same way he approached a malfunctioning system. Identify variables, isolate issues, don't assume causes without data. I want to understand what's going on, he said finally. And right now, the only thing I understand is that she's lying about where she is. Her mother winced slightly. And I don't do well with incomplete information, Greg added, almost as an aside. Her father huffed quietly. Join the club. Greg allowed himself the smallest hint of a smile at that. Then he reached back into his pocket and pulled out his phone again. I'm going to send her something, he said. Both parents watched him carefully. What kind of something? Her mother asked. Something that doesn't leave a lot of room for interpretation. He tapped a few buttons, then paused, glancing up at them. I need a favor. They exchanged a look, the silent kind that carried years of shared understanding. What is it? Her father asked. Greg gestured toward the three of them. A picture. Her mother blinked. A picture. Yeah, Greg said. All of us. Right here. Her father frowned. Why? Greg didn't hesitate. Because she thinks she's here. And she's not. I'd rather show her that than argue about it. The logic was simple, almost disarmingly so. Her mother pressed her lips together, considering. You think that will help? I think it will remove the option for more lying, Greg said. After that, it's just honesty. Her father studied him for another second, then nodded once. All right. Her mother gave a softer, slower nod. Okay, she said. All right. Greg stepped closer, raising his phone and angling it so they all fit in the frame. The moment felt oddly surreal. Three people standing in a kitchen, united by confusion rather than celebration. Try not to smile, Greg said dryly. Her father barked out a short laugh despite himself. That won't be a problem. Her mother managed a faint, conflicted smile anyway. I don't think I can help it. Just whatever feels natural, Greg said. He tapped the screen. The image captured exactly what it needed to. Three people who knew something wasn't right. Greg glanced at it briefly, then nodded to himself. Good enough. He opened the conversation with Cynthia and attached the photo. For a moment, he hesitated, not out of doubt, but to choose his words carefully. Then he typed, "You might want to explain this." He hit send. The message whooshed away, small and unassuming, carrying far more weight than its size suggested. The three of them stood there, waiting. 1 second. 2. 3. The chat showed as delivered. Then read. No response. Greg lowered the phone slowly. Well, her father said after a moment. That'll do it. Greg slipped the phone back into his pocket. Yeah. Her mother wrapped her arms around herself slightly. I don't understand why she would lie about something like this. Greg didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was steady, but quieter now. I've been asking myself that for about 10 minutes, he said. And I keep coming back to the same thing. What's that? She asked. If someone lies about where they are, he continued, choosing each word with care, it's usually because they don't want you to know where they actually are. The implication settled heavily. Her father's expression darkened. And why wouldn't she want that? Greg met his gaze, neither defensive nor confrontational. I don't know, he said honestly, but I intend to find out. Another silence followed, thicker than the last. Finally, Greg stepped back toward the doorway. I should go, he said. Her mother looked startled. Oh, Greg, you don't have to. I do, he interrupted gently. This isn't a conversation I should be having here. She nodded slowly, understanding whether she liked it or not. Her father pushed off the counter and walked him to the door. You going to call her? Not right now, Greg said. Why not? Greg paused at the threshold, considering that. Because right now, he said, I'd rather hear what she chooses to say without me asking. Her father absorbed that, then gave a single, approving nod. That's fair. Greg stepped outside, the morning air cooler than it had been when he arrived. The quiet neighborhood looked exactly the same, unchanged, unaffected, indifferent. He walked to his car, each step measured but not slow. Inside, he sat for a moment, hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. Then he pulled out his phone one more time. No new messages. Greg held the screen in his gaze for a second longer before pressing the power button and turning it off completely. The silence that followed was immediate, absolute. He set the phone on the passenger seat and started the engine. As he drove away, one thought began to take shape, quiet but persistent. It wasn't about this morning. It wasn't even about today. It was about every weekend before this one. And for the first time, Greg Connors wondered how many of them had come with explanations he had never thought to question. Chapter 3, Weekend Spirals. Greg's condo felt different when he returned, though nothing had actually changed. The furniture sat where it had always been. The kitchen remained clean in the way he preferred. Everything in its place, no clutter lingering on countertops. Even the faint hum of the refrigerator carried the same steady, unobtrusive rhythm. But the space itself no longer felt passive, felt observant. Greg dropped his keys into the tray by the door and stood for a moment longer than necessary, scanning the room as if he might spot something subtle he had missed before. There was no logical reason for the sensation creeping up his spine, no visible evidence that anything had shifted. And yet, okay, he muttered, pushing off from the door. We're not doing this. He moved with intention. Jacket off, sleeves rolled, a glass of water poured. Routine, structure, familiar processes that grounded him in something predictable. Machines don't malfunction without a reason, he reminded himself. Neither do people. The thought didn't comfort him as much as it normally would have. Greg settled into the couch again, this time with less ease than the previous night. The television clicked on, cycling through channels before landing on something vaguely watchable. His attention did not follow. Instead, his mind began to work. Not emotionally, he wasn't pacing or spiraling in the dramatic sense. Greg didn't approach problems that way. His version of spiraling was quieter, more methodical. He dissected. He rewound. He replayed. Every previous work trip sat neatly arranged in his memory, waiting to be reviewed. All right, he said under his breath, leaning forward slightly, elbows on his knees. Let's go. He started with the most recent one before this weekend. 2 weeks ago, he had packed, left. Cynthia had kissed him at the door, same as always. She'd said she had plans to relax, maybe meet a friend for coffee. He hadn't questioned it. Why would he? Greg reached for the remote and muted the television entirely. Silence felt more appropriate for what he was doing. He tried to recall specifics. Did she text him that weekend? Yes. He closed his eyes, pulling the memory forward. Short messages. Casual. Nothing unusual. Miss you. Safe travels. Let me know when you land. All standard. Okay, he murmured. Nothing there. He shifted backward in time. The month before. Same trip. Same routine. Had anything stood out? Another pause. Then something small surfaced. She said she was exhausted, he said aloud. Needed a quiet weekend. Greg frowned slightly. That wasn't unusual. Cynthia often talked about being tired at the end of long work weeks. But when he pressed the memory further, he found something else. She hadn't been home much when he returned. At the time, he'd attributed it to her schedule. Overlapping obligations. Normal life. Now the pattern looked less ordinary. Greg leaned back, rubbing a hand along his jaw. Or I'm forcing a pattern where there isn't one, he countered. That's also possible. He wasn't interested in jumping to conclusions. He'd said as much earlier, and he meant it. But the data points were beginning to stack. Not enough to prove anything definitive. Enough to raise questions. And Greg did not like unanswered questions. On the other side of the city, Cynthia Sommers was trying very hard not to think. It wasn't going particularly well. The spa had been her friend's idea. 2 nights away, massages, too much wine, and the vague promise of resetting energy. Whatever that was supposed to mean. In theory, it was exactly what she had told Greg she needed. A break. In practice, it came with complications she had carefully chosen not to examine too closely until now. You've checked your phone like 5 times in the last minute, Claire said, not looking up from her manicure. I have not, Cynthia replied automatically. You absolutely have, another friend chimed in from the lounge chair beside her. If your phone had feelings, it would file for a restraining order. Cynthia huffed, setting the phone face down on the small table. I'm just making sure I don't miss anything important. Claire arched an eyebrow. Like what? Cynthia opened her mouth, then closed it again. Exactly, Claire said, satisfied. The group fell into a brief lull, broken only by the quiet background music and the occasional murmur of other guests nearby. You didn't tell him you were coming here, did you? Claire added casually. Cynthia's silence was answer enough. That's what I thought. It's not like that, Cynthia said quickly, sitting up a little straighter. I just didn't want to deal with the conversation. What conversation? Claire asked. The one where he doesn't say anything directly but definitely thinks this is a bad idea. Claire laughed. So, the imaginary conversation? It's not imaginary, Cynthia insisted. Greg has opinions. Everyone has opinions. Yeah, but Greg's are subtle. That sounds exhausting. It's not, Cynthia said, though her confidence wavered slightly. It's just different. Claire tilted her head. So instead of having a normal conversation, you decided to lie about where you'd be? Cynthia winced. When you put it like that, how else would I put it? Claire asked lightly. Cynthia didn't answer, because there wasn't another way to put it. Back at the condo, Greg had moved from the couch to the kitchen without consciously deciding to. He rinsed a glass, dried it carefully, then set it down with more precision than necessary. His phone remained powered off on the counter. He'd thought about turning it back on, briefly, then decided against it. If Cynthia responded, he didn't want half explanations or hurried justifications sent between distractions. He wanted clarity. And clarity didn't happen through rushed text messages. Give it time, he said to himself. Greg leaned against the counter, arms crossed, gaze unfocused as his thoughts continued their steady progression. The problem wasn't just the lie. It was the ease of it. No hesitation. No delay. She had responded immediately when he asked what she was doing. The answer had come effortlessly. Just watching TV before bed. Then later, just having coffee with my parents. Two separate lies, delivered with identical ease. That suggested practice. Or at least, comfort. Greg exhaled slowly, pushing himself upright again. No assumptions, he reminded himself once more. But the phrase carried less weight now. Because whether intentional or not, the situation had already shifted from unknown to undeniable. She had lied, twice, about something simple, which meant the reason behind it was unlikely to be simple at all. Cynthia stood at the edge of the pool later that afternoon, her friends splashing lazily in the water behind her. Sunlight shimmered across the surface, bright and distracting. She held her phone again, thumb hovering over the screen. Greg hadn't responded. He hadn't called. He hadn't done anything. And that was worse. Okay, she muttered to herself. That's not great. She opened the thread again, staring at the photo he had sent. Him, her mother, her father, all standing together, expressions somewhere between confused and unimpressed. There was no room to explain that away, no joke to deflect it, no casual response that would smooth the edges. It was just there. Claire drifted over, water lapping gently around her shoulders. You're doing the thing again. What thing? I made a decision and now I regret the decision, but I'm pretending I don't think. Cynthia let out a quiet groan. I don't regret it. Claire said nothing. Okay, Cynthia amended. I regret parts of it. There we go. It's just a weekend, Cynthia said, though the words felt weaker now. It's not like I'm doing anything wrong. You're not, Claire agreed easily. But you did lie. Cynthia pressed her lips together. And unless Greg is a complete idiot, Claire continued, he's probably not thrilled about that. He's not an idiot, Cynthia said quickly. Then there you have it. Cynthia stared down at her phone again. I love him, she said quietly. Claire's expression softened. I know you do. Cynthia hesitated, searching for the right words. I didn't want to feel like I had to choose. Choose what? Between this, she gestured vaguely around them, and everything with him. Claire leaned her arms on the edge of the pool. That's kind of the problem, though. What is? You're acting like those things can't exist at the same time. Cynthia didn't respond, because deep down she wasn't sure they could. As evening settled in, Greg sat once more in the quiet of his living room, the weight of the day pressing in. Not dramatically, not overwhelmingly, but persistently. He reached for his phone at last, turned it on. The screen lit up instantly. Messages populated the display, several from Cynthia. He didn't open them right away. Instead, he leaned back slowly, eyes fixed on the ceiling. The situation had moved past confusion, past coincidence. Now it was something else. Something that required answers. Not guesses. Not assumptions. Answers. Greg exhaled, steady and controlled, then finally looked down at the screen. Whatever came next, he realized, wasn't about one weekend. It was about everything that came after. Chapter 4, The Intervention. Cynthia didn't go back to the spa after that afternoon. She tried, she really did. She sat through dinner, nodded at the right moments, even laughed once or twice at jokes that would normally land. But everything felt off, like she was slightly out of sync with her own life. Greg hadn't replied. Not to her initial messages. Not to the half-formed explanations she'd sent after the photo. Not to the "we need to talk" that she had deleted twice before finally pressing send. Nothing. The silence followed her out of the resort, into her car, and all the way to the familiar street she had grown up on. By the time she pulled into her parents' driveway, the weight of it had settled fully. Not panic exactly, but consequence. You picked the wrong strategy, she muttered to herself, shutting off the engine. Definitely wrong. She didn't linger in the car. There wasn't any point delaying what she already knew was waiting inside. When she opened the front door, the house greeted her with a quiet that felt different from usual. Not empty, but expectant. Mom, she called. In the kitchen, came the reply. Of course. Cynthia stepped inside, setting her bag down by the door before moving toward the kitchen. Her parents were both there, her mother standing near the sink, her father seated at the table with a mug of coffee that had long since stopped steaming. Neither of them smiled. Hey, Cynthia said, aiming for casual and missing it by a noticeable margin. Her mother turned slowly, arms crossing gently. Not defensive, but not relaxed either. Hey, she returned. Her father didn't say anything at first. He just looked at her, really looked at her the way he did when he was trying to understand something on principle, not just on the surface. Cynthia shifted under the attention. So, she started, setting her hands on the back of a chair. This is weird timing, huh? Her father leaned back slightly in his chair. You could call it that. Her mother gestured toward the seat across from her father. Sit down, Cynthia. It wasn't a suggestion. She sat. There was a brief silence, the kind that usually preceded something important. Greg came by this morning, her mother said. Cynthia winced. Yeah, I gathered that. You want to explain what's going on? Her father asked. Cynthia's first instinct was to deflect, to soften it, to package it into something easier to handle. But the photo was still fresh in her mind. The look on all three of their faces. Greg standing there, calm but unmistakably done with guessing. So she exhaled and said the truth, or at least the version she could manage all at once. I went away with Claire and the others for the weekend, she said. Spa trip. Nothing crazy. Her father's eyebrows lifted. And you told Greg you were here? Yes. And then, her mother added, voice quieter but firmer. You told him you were here again this morning. Cynthia nodded once. Yes. The admission hung in the air, simple and unembellished. Why? Her father asked. There it was. The real question. Cynthia looked down at her hands, fingers fidgeting slightly against each other. I didn't want to have the conversation, she said finally. What conversation? He pressed. The one where I tell him I'm going away with my friends for the weekend and he. She hesitated. Disapproves. Her mother tilted her head. Has he ever told you not to spend time with your friends? No, Cynthia admitted. Has he ever stopped you? No. Then what are you avoiding? Her father asked. Cynthia opened her mouth, closed it, because the honest answer wasn't about Greg. It never had been. I don't know, she said softer now. Her father leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. That's not true. Cynthia looked up. You do know, he continued. You just don't like the answer. Her mother didn't interrupt. She just watched Cynthia carefully, giving her the space to see it herself. Cynthia started again, then stopped. The words fought their way up slowly this time. I don't want things to change, she said. Things have already changed, her mother replied gently. You live with him now. I know, Cynthia said quickly. And I love that. I do. It's just, when I'm with my friends, it feels like, she searched for it, like I get to be the version of myself that doesn't have to think about everything being so permanent. Her father's expression softened just slightly. You mean the version of yourself that isn't committed yet? Cynthia hesitated. That sounds worse when you say it. It's not worse, he said. It's clearer. Her mother stepped a little closer, resting a hand lightly on the back of Cynthia's chair. Sweetheart, she said, there's nothing wrong with enjoying your friends or taking a weekend for yourself. That's not the issue. Then what is? Cynthia asked. The lying, her father said immediately. And what it represents, her mother added. Cynthia swallowed. I wasn't doing anything wrong, she insisted, though the argument had already lost most of its strength. Her father nodded slowly. I believe you. She blinked, surprised. You do? Yes, he said. I don't think you were out there betraying him in the way people usually assume. But, she prompted. But you were still living two lives, he finished. Cynthia looked down again. That's where the problem is, he continued. Not in what you did this weekend, but in the fact that you felt like you had to hide it. Her mother nodded. A relationship doesn't work when one person is getting one version of you and the rest of the world gets another. Cynthia let out a slow breath, the weight of that settling in. I didn't think it was that big of a deal, she said quietly. That's because you were looking at the weekend, her father said. Greg's looking at the pattern. The word landed. Pattern. It was exactly how Greg would see it. Of course it was. He hasn't responded, Cynthia admitted. Not to anything. Her mother's expression tightened with concern. That's not like him, is it? No, Cynthia said. He always responds. Her father leaned back again. Then he's taking this seriously. I know, she whispered. Silence filled the kitchen again, but it felt different now. Less tense, more reflective. After a moment, her mother pulled out a chair and sat beside her. This isn't about control, she said gently. It's not about him telling you what you can or can't do. I know. It's about trust, her mother continued. And trust isn't just about not cheating. It's about being honest, even when it's inconvenient. Cynthia nodded slowly. And right now, her father added. He doesn't know which version of you he's been with. That one hit harder than she expected. I love him, she said again, more firmly this time. Her mother smiled faintly. Then you need to decide what that means. It means I want a future with him. Then you can't keep one foot in a different life, her father said bluntly. That's not how this works. Cynthia sat there, absorbing it, really absorbing it, for the first time. Her friends weren't the problem. Her relationship wasn't the problem. The problem was her trying to maintain both identities without letting them meet. I thought I had more time to figure it out, she admitted. Her mother shook her head softly. You had time. You just used it avoiding the choice. Cynthia let out a shaky laugh. That sounds like me. Her father gave her a small, understanding nod. It sounds like a lot of people. The difference is most don't get called on it this clearly. She thought of the photo again. Greg standing there, calm but unmistakably unwilling to ignore the inconsistency. No, she said quietly. I definitely got called on it. Her mother reached over and squeezed her hand. So what are you going to do about it? Cynthia sat with that question. Not rushing it this time. Not deflecting. Just facing it. I'm going to tell him the truth, she said at last. All of it? Her father asked. All of it. And after that? Her mother said. Cynthia took a breath, steadying herself. After that, I'm going to stop acting like I'm single when I'm not. Her father nodded, satisfied but not triumphant. Good. That's a start. Her mother smiled more warmly now. And your friends? They're not bad people, Cynthia said. They're just in a different place. Exactly, her mother said. And that's okay. Cynthia stood slowly, the decision settling into something solid beneath her. I should go, she said. I need to talk to him in person. Her father glanced toward the door, then back at her. You think he'll listen? Cynthia hesitated. I don't know, she admitted. Then, after a beat, she added, but I know he deserves the chance to decide. Neither parent argued with that. As she grabbed her bag and headed toward the door, the house felt different again. Not tense, not heavy, but grounded. Outside, the late afternoon sun stretched across the driveway as Cynthia slid into her car. This time, she didn't hesitate before starting the engine. Whatever came next, she wasn't going to hide from it. And for the first time all weekend, the direction she was heading felt clear. Chapter 5, The Return Home. Greg was sitting exactly where Cynthia expected him to be. It wasn't something they had ever discussed, but there was a predictability to him, an internal alignment between thought and action that made his behavior consistent in a way she'd always found grounding. When she opened the condo door late that evening, she knew before she even rounded the corner into the living room that he'd be there, on the couch, upright, not watching anything in particular, waiting. The door clicked softly behind her, louder than it had any right to be. Hey, Cynthia said, her voice carefully neutral as she stepped inside. Greg turned his head, meeting her eyes immediately. He didn't stand, didn't move toward her. He just acknowledged her presence. Hey, no anger, no warmth either, just presence. Cynthia shifted the strap of her bag on her shoulder. You're home. I am. A beat passed. She glanced toward the television. It was on, but muted. Some kind of nature program, visually interesting but functionally irrelevant. You didn't go on the trip? She asked, even though she already knew the answer from context alone. It got cancelled, Greg said. Equipment failure. Entire line went offline. Oh, she let out a quiet breath. That makes sense. Another silence filled the room, stretching just long enough to become uncomfortable. Cynthia set her bag down by the chair, then remained standing, unsure where to position herself. You got my messages, she said. Greg nodded once. I did. And I haven't responded yet, he said calmly. She pressed her lips together. Yeah. I noticed. The understatement almost made her laugh, but the situation held it firmly in place. Greg shifted slightly, leaning forward just enough to rest his forearms on his knees. His posture wasn't aggressive. If anything, it was intentional, engaged. I figured, he continued, it would make more sense to have this conversation in person. Cynthia nodded quickly. Yeah, I agree. Good, Greg said. We're aligned on something. There it was, subtle, dry, just enough edge to register without escalating. Cynthia took a step closer, then stopped again, settling for standing near the end of the couch instead of sitting. I'm sorry, she said. Greg didn't react immediately. He let the words sit for a moment, as if weighing them. What part? He asked. Cynthia blinked. What? What part are you sorry for? Greg clarified. His tone wasn't accusatory, it was precise. The lying? The situation. Getting caught. Cynthia exhaled slowly. The lying, she said. Definitely the lying. Greg inclined his head slightly. Okay. I didn't mean for it to turn into this, she added, gesturing vaguely between them. It usually doesn't start that way, Greg replied. Cynthia winced faintly. That's fair. Greg leaned back now, shifting into the corner of the couch, one arm resting along the back. His posture relaxed, but his eyes remained steady, focused on her. So, he said, walk me through it. Cynthia swallowed. The whole thing. The whole thing. She nodded, glancing down briefly as she collected her thoughts. I went away for the weekend with Claire and the others, she began. Spa, dinners, probably too much wine. Nothing crazy. Nothing secret beyond the fact that I didn't tell you about it. Greg didn't interrupt. I told you I was staying here, she continued, motioning around the condo. Because I didn't want to deal with the conversation about going. What conversation? Greg asked, echoing her parents' earlier question almost word for word. The one where you, she hesitated, then corrected herself. Where I think you're not going to like it. Greg's expression didn't change. Have I ever told you not to go somewhere with your friends? No. Have I ever even suggested it? No, she repeated. Then what exactly were you avoiding? He asked. Cynthia let out a small, humorless breath. Apparently, the truth. Greg studied her for a moment. That's one answer, he said. Not a very complete one. I know, she admitted. The room settled again, quieter this time but less sharp. Cynthia moved finally, sitting on the edge of the armchair across from him. She leaned forward, elbows resting on her knees, mirroring his earlier posture. I didn't want things to feel different, she said. Greg tilted his head slightly. Different how? More permanent, she said. More serious, I guess. His brow furrowed faintly, not in confusion, but in consideration. You moved in 5 months ago, he said. We passed serious a while back. I know, she said quickly. And I want that. I really do. But, Greg prompted. But when I'm with them, she continued, it feels like everything is still flexible. Like I'm not locked into anything yet. The words landed between them, fragile but honest. Greg took a moment before responding. Do you feel locked in with me? He asked. Cynthia looked up sharply. No, that's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? She hesitated again, searching for something that wouldn't sound worse than the truth already did. I meant, I don't have to think about everything long-term when I'm with them, she said. Greg nodded slowly, absorbing that. So instead of dealing with that feeling, he said, you created a version of your life where you didn't have to. Cynthia winced. When you say it like that, it loses its charm, he offered dryly. A little. Greg leaned forward again, resting his hands together. Here's the problem, he said. Not the trip, not your friends, not even the fact that you wanted a weekend that felt different. Cynthia waited. The problem, he continued, is that you lied about something simple, twice, without hesitation. She nodded quietly. I know. And that tells me this wasn't a one-time panic decision, he added. It tells me you were comfortable doing it. Cynthia didn't answer that, because she couldn't. Greg exhaled slowly, not frustrated, more like steadying himself. I don't need perfection, he said. I don't need every decision to be ideal. But I do need to know that I'm dealing with reality. You are, Cynthia said quickly. You always have been. Greg shook his head once. Not this weekend. Silence. That one didn't have an immediate response. Cynthia sat back slightly, her shoulders dropping just a fraction. I talked to my parents, she said after a moment. Greg's eyes flickered briefly. I figured. They made it very clear that I can't keep doing this, she continued, splitting things into separate versions depending on where I am. Greg said nothing, but his expression sharpened slightly, more attentive now. I wasn't trying to hide some huge secret, she added. I was trying to avoid feeling like I had to choose. And now? Greg asked. Cynthia met his gaze directly. Now I realize that not choosing is a choice. He held her eyes for a second longer, gauging. And what does that choice look like? He asked. It looks like being honest, she said. Even when it's inconvenient. Even when I think you might not like it. Greg nodded slightly. That's a start. Cynthia exhaled, tension she hadn't fully acknowledged easing just a little. I'm not asking you to just get over this, she said carefully. I know I broke your trust. Greg's response was immediate. You did. No hostility. Just confirmation. And I don't expect you to fix it overnight, she continued. But I want to fix it. Greg leaned back again, considering her. How? He asked simply. Cynthia hesitated, then answered honestly. I don't know exactly yet, she said. But I know it starts with not lying about where I am and what I'm doing. Greg's lips twitched faintly. That's a low bar. I'm setting realistic goals, she shot back before she could stop herself. The briefest flicker of humor passed between them. Unexpected, but real. Fair enough, Greg said. The moment softened something in the room, though not completely. I'm not ending things over this, he added after a beat. Cynthia blinked, relief flickering across her face before she could hide it. But, he continued, I'm also not ignoring it. I wouldn't expect you to. Good. Another pause, less heavy now, more stable. Greg glanced toward the kitchen briefly, then back at her. There's food in the fridge, he said. I made dinner last night. Cynthia let out a small, surprised laugh. You made dinner for me? I assumed you'd come home eventually, he said. Seemed like a reasonable bet at the time. She shook her head slightly, the tension easing another notch. I'll take that as a good sign, she said. It's a neutral sign, Greg corrected. Don't overinterpret it. Of course not. But the hint of a smile on her face said otherwise. They sat there for a moment longer, not fully repaired, not fully comfortable, but no longer on opposite sides of something they couldn't cross. For now, that was enough. And for Greg, the next step wasn't about forgetting what had happened. It was about watching what happened next. Chapter 6, Terms of Recalibration. The condo was quieter the next morning, but it was a different kind of quiet. Not the hollow stillness Greg had experienced the previous night, where everything seemed to echo with unanswered questions. This quiet felt intentional, measured. Greg was already awake when Cynthia stepped into the kitchen. He stood at the counter, pouring coffee with the same steady efficiency that defined most of his movements. There was no hesitation, no visible strain, just the consistent rhythm of someone who had already decided how he was going to approach the day. Morning, she said cautiously. Greg glanced over his shoulder. Morning. There was a pause, but it wasn't as sharp as before. Progress, Cynthia thought. Small, but real. She moved to the cabinet, pulling out a mug, her movements slower than usual. Not from indecision, but from a heightened awareness of everything between them. Every glance, every word carried more weight now. Did you sleep at all? She asked. Yeah, Greg said, setting the coffee maker back in place. Eventually. That's good. It is. Another pause. Cynthia poured her coffee, then leaned against the counter, holding the mug in both hands like it gave her something to anchor to. So, she began. Where are we? Greg didn't answer immediately. He took a sip from his mug, then set it down carefully before turning to face her fully. That's a good question, he said. And I think we're past the point of pretending nothing happened, he replied calmly. Cynthia nodded. Agreed. Good, Greg continued. Because I'm not interested in doing that. She exhaled slowly. Neither am I. Greg studied her for a moment, then gestured slightly toward the small table by the window. Let's sit, he said. They moved in sync, taking their usual seats without thinking about it. The familiarity of the motion contrasted sharply with how different things felt now. Greg rested his hands around his mug, not drinking, just holding it. I've been thinking about this since yesterday, he said. Cynthia resisted the urge to interrupt. She just nodded once, encouraging him to continue. And the conclusion I keep coming back to, he added, is that this isn't about one weekend. I know, she said softly. It's about trust, Greg continued. Not in a broad, dramatic sense, just basic reliability. Cynthia swallowed. When you tell me something, he went on, I need to know it's real, not a version of reality, not something adjusted to avoid a conversation. Just true. It will be, she said quickly. From now on, Greg held up a hand slightly, not to silence her, but to slow the momentum. I'm not working off promises right now, he said. She stopped, nodding again. Not because I don't think you mean them, he added, but because intent and behavior don't always line up. That's fair, she admitted. Greg let the silence settle for a second before continuing. So instead of making promises, he said, we're going to focus on expectations. Cynthia blinked slightly. Expectations? Yeah, he said. Clear ones. Manageable ones. Things that actually define how this works going forward. She leaned forward a little. Okay. Greg nodded once, as if confirming his own train of thought. First, he said, no more lying. About anything that affects us. Agreed, she said immediately. And that includes things that seem small at the time, he added. Because this started small. I understand, she replied. Greg watched her closely, not looking for perfection, just alignment. Second, he continued, if you want to do something, you tell me. Not because you need permission. I know, she said quickly. But because we're supposed to be on the same page, he finished. Cynthia nodded. That makes sense. And if I have an opinion, Greg added, I'll tell you directly, not indirectly, not subtly. That caught her attention. She tilted her head slightly. You mean you'll actually say what you think? Greg allowed a faint hint of a smile. I'll try not to rely on you being telepathic. Wow, she said lightly. Big changes all around. Let's not get carried away, he replied. But the dryness in his tone didn't erase the underlying shift. For the first time since she walked in, the tension eased just a fraction more. And third, Greg said, his voice steadying again, we don't split our lives into separate versions. Cynthia straightened slightly. That means, he continued, your life with your friends and your life with me don't exist in different categories. They overlap. They interact. They're the same life. She nodded slowly, the weight of that settling in again. I can do that, she said. Greg didn't respond right away. He was watching her, measuring, not looking for the right words, but for the conviction behind them. I think you can, he said finally. The distinction mattered. Not I believe you completely. Not this is resolved. Just, I think you can. Cynthia let out a quiet breath, almost relieved by the realism of it. So what happens now? She asked. Greg leaned back slightly in his chair. Now, he said, we test it. Test it? She echoed. Yeah, he replied. Not in some dramatic way, just naturally. Cynthia frowned slightly. How? Greg shrugged. I have another trip next weekend. Her eyes widened a fraction. Already? It was rescheduled after yesterday's cancellation, he said. Same type of deal. Weekend inspection. Cynthia nodded slowly, absorbing that. And what do you expect me to do? She asked. Greg shook his head once. That's the point. I'm not going to tell you what to do. That seems dangerous, she said before she could stop herself. Greg raised an eyebrow. Is it? She hesitated. Then, reluctantly, she shook her head. No. It's simple, he said. You decide what you want to do with your weekend. And I tell you the truth about it, she finished. Exactly. Cynthia stared down at her coffee for a moment, the reflection trembling slightly on the surface. And you're just going to trust that? She asked quietly. Greg considered the question. No, he said. She looked up sharply. I'm going to pay attention, he corrected. Trust comes after consistency. That stung a little, but it also felt fair. Okay, she said. Another silence followed, but this one was different again. Quieter, steadier, less weighted with uncertainty. Greg picked up his coffee and took another sip, then glanced at her with something closer to his usual expression. Less guarded, more neutral. You should eat something, he said. There's still food in the fridge. Cynthia smiled faintly. You're really committed to that dinner, huh? I made it, he replied. It deserves to be appreciated. She let out a small laugh, genuine this time. I'll make sure it gets the recognition it deserves. Good. She stood, moving toward the kitchen, the motion lighter than it had been when she first walked in. Greg watched her for a moment, not suspiciously, not analytically. Just watching. This wasn't fixed. Not even close. But for the first time since everything unraveled, it felt like they were building something again instead of trying to hold something together. And for Greg Connors, that distinction made all the difference. Chapter 7, the next trip, Greg packed the same way he always did. There was something reassuring about it, the predictability, the clean sequence of steps that didn't require emotional interpretation. 2 shirts, 1 pair of jeans, travel kit, phone charger wrapped neatly and placed along the edge of the suitcase. No hesitation, no second guessing. This time, though, there was one difference. Cynthia was watching. She leaned against the bedroom doorway, arms loosely crossed, not closed off, just present, observing in a way she hadn't before, as if this routine held more meaning now than it ever had. You don't even think about it, do you? She said. Greg didn't look up from folding his second shirt. About what? Packing, she replied. You just do it, like it's rehearsed. It is, he said plainly. I've been doing this once a month for 3 years. Still, she added, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Most people would at least pause and wonder if they forgot something. Greg zipped the suitcase halfway, then glanced up at her. I've already accounted for forgetting something, he said. It's built into the system. Cynthia raised an eyebrow. You've built forgetting into your process? Of course. That's why I keep a duplicate charger in my travel kit. She let out a small laugh. That's absurd. That's efficient, he corrected. The lightness hung there for a moment. Not forced, not fragile. It didn't erase what had happened, but it coexisted with it, which felt like progress. Greg stood and closed the suitcase fully, setting it down by the bed. So, he said, turning toward her, what's your weekend look like? The question landed differently this time. Last week, she would have deflected, adjusted the answer until it felt safe, maybe softened it into something vague, something unchallenging. Now she paused, not to filter but to decide how to say it clearly. I'm having dinner with Claire tonight, she said. Just dinner. No overnight anything. Greg nodded once, not reacting beyond acknowledgement. And tomorrow, she continued, I thought I'd stay home. Maybe actually do the whole relax thing I said I was doing last time. That sounds ambitious, Greg said dryly. She smiled faintly. I'm pacing myself. Smart. Another pause. Then Cynthia added, more deliberately this time. Claire asked if I wanted to go out after dinner. Greg's gaze stayed steady. And I told her I'd think about it, Cynthia said. So, I might, but I haven't decided yet. Greg tilted his head slightly, studying her. Not for hidden meaning this time, but for something simpler. Alignment. Okay, he said. That was it. No lecture. No subtle disapproval. No carefully worded hint. Just, okay. Cynthia exhaled quietly, something in her shoulders easing. You're not going to ask questions? She said. I just did, Greg replied. You're not going to weigh in? You didn't ask for my opinion, he said evenly. She blinked, then let out a short laugh. That's new. You wanted direct, he reminded her. I did, she admitted. Greg picked up his suitcase, moving toward the door. If you want my opinion, I'll give it. Cynthia considered that, then shook her head. No, I want to decide this one on my own. Greg nodded again. Then decide. It wasn't dismissive. It was respectful. And for the first time, Cynthia understood what that actually felt like in a concrete way. Not just the idea of independence, but the responsibility that came with it. That evening, the restaurant buzzed with comfortable background noise, conversations blending into a low hum, glasses clinking, plates shifting. Claire leaned back in her chair, studying Cynthia with open curiosity. You're different tonight, she said. Cynthia sipped her drink, raising an eyebrow. Different how? More present, Claire said. Like you left the part of your brain that overthinks everything in the car. I wish, Cynthia muttered. So what changed? Cynthia set her glass down carefully, considering how to explain something that felt both simple and complicated. I stopped pretending I could keep things separate, she said. Claire tilted her head. Meaning? Meaning? This is my life, Cynthia said, gesturing lightly between them. And so is everything at home. It's not one or the other. Claire nodded slowly. That sounds reasonable. It wasn't before, Cynthia admitted. Claire gave her a side look. No. Before you were performing some kind of weird balancing act. Yeah, Cynthia said with a small, self-aware smile. It didn't work as well as I thought. Claire laughed. Shocking. They fell into a more natural rhythm after that, conversation flowing easily. Felt familiar but not identical to before. Cynthia wasn't splitting her attention anymore, wasn't managing how much of herself she allowed into each moment. She was just there. At some point, Claire glanced at her phone and smirked. So, she said, there's a place downtown, music, drinks, the usual chaos. You in? The invitation hovered. Old Cynthia would have said yes immediately, relishing the extension of the night, the easy slide into something unstructured and separate from everything else. This time she paused. Not because she wasn't tempted, because she was thinking. I might pass, she said. Claire blinked. Really? Yeah, Cynthia said. I'm kind of in the mood to go home. Claire leaned back, studying her with a mixture of surprise and curiosity. You sure you're okay? I'm good, Cynthia replied. Just choosing differently, I guess. Claire smirked. Wow. Who are you and what have you done with my friend? Cynthia smiled. She grew up a little. Dangerous development. Tell me about it. They shared a laugh, the moment light and easy. Not strained, not defensive. And importantly, not hidden. Later that night, Cynthia unlocked the condo door and stepped inside. The quiet greeted her again, but this time it felt steady, calm in a way that didn't carry uncertainty. She set her keys down and glanced around, the space feeling more like hers again. Not something she was dividing her attention from, but something she was actively part of. After a moment, she pulled out her phone. Greg had texted earlier. Landed. Hotel is acceptable. No immediate crises. She smiled. Her reply came easy, honest, unfiltered. Glad you made it. Dinner with Claire was good. Came home early. I think I'm officially becoming responsible. There was a pause before his response appeared. We'll monitor that claim over time. Cynthia laughed quietly to herself, settling onto the couch. Fair. She set the phone down beside her, leaning back as the quiet settled in. Not empty this time, not uncertain. Just stable. And somewhere miles away, Greg sat in a hotel room, reading her message with the same steady attention he applied to everything else. No grand conclusions. No immediate restoration of trust. But something simpler. Something observable. For the first time since everything unraveled, what she said matched what she did. And for Greg Connors, that was exactly where trust began to rebuild. Chapter 8, Quality Assurance. Greg didn't rush home. It wasn't a dramatic choice or a calculated one. It was simply consistent with who he was. The inspection had gone well, the machinery performing within acceptable tolerances, the documentation clean and uneventful. By all measurable standards, it had been a successful trip. He left the facility, returned the rental car, and boarded his flight with the same steady presence he brought to everything else. But this time, there was something different waiting at the end of it. Not uncertainty, not suspicion, something quieter, something still being tested. Cynthia had spent most of Sunday exactly where she said she would be. At home. Not because she was trying to prove a point, at least not entirely, but because when she had actually stopped and thought about what she wanted to do, the answer had been simpler than she expected. She cooked. Not well, but with enthusiasm. She cleaned. Slightly more thoroughly than necessary, but it gave her something to do. At one point, she caught herself reorganizing a cabinet Greg had already organized better than she ever could, and she stopped halfway through with a laugh. Okay, she muttered. That's just disrespectful to the system. Instead, she settled into the rhythm of the condo, not avoiding it, not escaping it, living in it. When Greg texted Sunday evening to confirm his flight time, her response was immediate and easy. I'll be here when you get back. No embellishment, no adjustment, just truth. By the time Greg unlocked the condo door Monday evening, he already knew what he expected to find. But expectation and certainty were not the same thing. The door opened quietly, and there she was, on the couch, exactly where she would have been any other ordinary evening. One leg tucked under her, a blanket draped loosely over her lap, the television playing something she seemed only half invested in. Cynthia glanced up, and for a split second, something flickered across her face. Nervousness, anticipation, but it settled quickly into something more natural. Hey, she said. Greg stepped inside, closing the door behind him, his eyes taking in the room. Not searching, not scanning, just observing. Hey, he set his bag down by the entry table. You made it back without any heroic incidents? She asked. Barely, he replied. There was a moment at baggage claim where things got tense. Did you survive? I adapted. Impressive. The ease of it surprised both of them, not because it erased what had happened, but because it didn't feel forced. Greg stepped further into the room, shrugging off his jacket. You were here all weekend? He asked. Cynthia didn't hesitate. Mostly, she said. Dinner Friday. Home after. Stayed in Saturday. Went out for groceries Sunday because I realized I was dangerously close to eating cereal for every meal. Greg nodded, processing not the details themselves but how they were delivered. Clear. Direct. No gaps. No spontaneous spas? He asked lightly. She smiled. No spontaneous spas. Good, he said. Those are hard to explain. They really are. Another pause settled between them, but this one wasn't uncomfortable. It was evaluative. Greg picked up his bag and carried it to the bedroom, setting it down before returning to the living room. Cynthia watched him, her posture relaxed but attentive. So? She said. Greg tilted his head slightly. So what? She gestured lightly between them. So, this part where you analyze everything and decide what it all means. Greg huffed a quiet breath, something almost like amusement slipping through. You make it sound more intense than it is. Is it? She challenged. He considered that. Maybe a little, he admitted. She nodded. Thought so. Greg sat down on the opposite end of the couch. Not too close, not distant either. Just present. I'm not drawing final conclusions, he said. I wouldn't expect you to, Cynthia replied. But, he added, this weekend matched what you said it would be. It wasn't praise. It was observation. Still, it mattered. Cynthia leaned back slightly, letting that land without overreacting to it. Consistency, she said. That's the goal, right? That's the requirement, Greg corrected gently. Right? She said. Requirement. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. They sat there for a moment, the silence no longer something to fill, but something that simply existed between them. Then Cynthia glanced over at him, her expression shifting. More thoughtful now. Can I ask you something? She said. You just did, Greg replied. She rolled her eyes lightly. An actual question. Go ahead. She hesitated, not because she didn't know what she wanted to ask, but because it felt more significant than the ones before. Where is this going? She asked. Greg didn't answer immediately, not because he didn't have an answer, but because he was choosing how to give it. Finally, he leaned back slightly, his expression steady. That depends, he said. On what? On whether what happened this weekend keeps happening. Cynthia nodded slowly. That's fair, she said. Greg held her gaze. Not distant, not guarded, just direct. I meant what I said before, he continued. I wasn't planning to end things over one mistake. I know. But I also wasn't going to ignore it, he added. I know that too. Another pause. Then, quieter. I don't want to lose this, Cynthia said. Greg's expression softened slightly. Not dramatically, but enough to be noticeable. Then don't treat it like something you can afford to lose, he replied. The words weren't harsh. They were honest. And this time, they didn't hit like criticism. They felt like clarity. Cynthia nodded once, more to herself than to him. Okay, she said. They sat together after that, the conversation easing back into something lighter. Small details about the trip, minor stories about her uneventful but oddly satisfying weekend. Nothing dramatic, nothing forced, just normal. And somewhere in the middle of it, Greg found himself watching her. Not with suspicion, not with doubt, but with a quieter kind of attention. The kind that didn't look for problems. The kind that looked for alignment, for consistency, for truth. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't finished. But it was real. Later that night, as they moved through their familiar routines, getting ready for bed, adjusting the thermostat, negotiating entirely unnecessary blanket distribution, something settled between them. Not resolution. Something better. Stability. Greg lay back against the pillow, staring at the ceiling for a moment before glancing over at Cynthia. She was already halfway under the blanket, predictably shifting toward his side of the bed without realizing it. He huffed a quiet breath. Stay on your side, he said. She smiled without opening her eyes. No, of course not. Some things, it seemed, didn't need to change. And as Greg closed his eyes, one thought settled clearly in his mind. Not rushed, not forced. Just recognized. The idea of marriage wasn't abstract anymore. It hadn't been. And for a while. But now it came with something new. Not just certainty. Confidence. Not that everything would be perfect, but that when something didn't work, they would fix it. Together. And for Greg Connors, that was the only kind of quality assurance that mattered.